Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
There's been a dramatic twist in the contest for the Tory leadership, with a summons for Boris Johnson to appear in court over claims he lied by saying the UK gave the EU £350 million a week. Mr Johnson, who's the current front-runner in the leadership contest to succeed Theresa May as Prime Minister, stands accused of misconduct in public office after making the claim during the 2016 EU referendum campaign. Mr Johnson's lawyers have described the case as a political stunt. Our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar, has the latest.
He's always loved attention, just not this kind. Boris Johnson, the official Leave campaign's far from secret weapon, is being hauled into court to face accusations that he lied to the public about Brexit.
The bastion of independence.
No one campaigns like him, but it's the claim about how much Britain sends to the EU, which he echoed as an MP, that triggered a rare private prosecution and the rarer outcome of a top politician being summoned to a criminal court. His accusers in court papers say he repeatedly lied and misled the British public as to the cost of EU membership, expressly stating, endorsing or inferring that the cost of EU membership was £350 million a week. Businessman Marcus Ball, on the right, crowd-funded the prosecution, arguing it's about standards in public office.
Mr Ball, who stood with me today, considers that politicians have made or said things that are untrue, and he wants to ensure that there's a better standard in politics than currently is the case.
But Boris Johnson, flag carrier for Brexit, is now favourite in the race to be the next Prime Minister. He may even be PM when and if his case is finally tried. A source close to Boris Johnson said this prosecution is nothing less than a politically motivated attempt to reverse Brexit and crush the will of the people. If the case is allowed to proceed, the state, rather than the public, will be put in charge of determining the strength of arguments at elections. This runs counter to centuries of British political tradition and risks undermining our democracy. The dispute centres on campaign claims of how much Britain pays the EU against the rebate which comes back. Some say it's a matter of principle.
Generally speaking, I prefer it that the courts keep out of political affairs. I find that the general public are incredibly discerning.
The case will be a political spectacle. Boris Johnson denies all wrongdoing, and today's ruling was no finding of guilt, but the verdict could have an impact on politics and campaigning in Britain. John Pienaar, BBC News.
Our Home Affairs correspondent Tom Symonds is with me now. So, Tom, what more can you tell me about how the legal action will proceed and why it's been brought against Boris Johnson rather than other prominent politicians who are associated with the campaign?
I think the main reason, according to the prosecutors, as we have to call them, is that he was so extensively covered when he made these comments that there is a lot of evidence that they can marshal for their case. In fact, they said they couldn't really find enough to charge anybody else. And this is a serious allegation. Misconduct in public office carries a maximum life sentence. It has to be heard in a Crown Court. It has to be heard in front of a jury. And what the district judge today has said, though she hasn't ruled on the facts, she has said there is a case to answer. And so to prove he's guilty, the prosecution have to show that he was a public official, that he acted recklessly, abused his office. And the key thing there is public official, and that's going to be the battleground, I think. They say, his accusers, that he was a public official. He was Mayor of London. Brexit was the policy of his office. He wrote letters to that effect, and that he knew that the claims about the 350 million were not correct, were untrue. Now, Mr Johnson's lawyers say he was actually a political campaigner when he made these comments. It was nothing to do, if you like, with the day job of being mayor. There's an added complication that this is a private prosecution, so at any point under law, the Crown Prosecution Service can come in and stop the whole thing. But I think it's probably more likely we'll see Boris Johnson try to fight this through the courts right from the start and try and show that the court process is being abused. But the courts, nothing ever happens quickly in the courts, and as John said there, this could be all happening while he's running for the leadership of the party, possibly even Prime Minister.
Tom, thank you.
Boris Johnson could face charges in a magistrate's court in the middle of the Conservative leadership contest after a judge gave the go-ahead to a private prosecution against him. A campaigner brought a case of misconduct in public office against Mr Johnson, based on claims that he lied to the public during the EU referendum campaign. Allies of the former Foreign Secretary say the case is politically motivated and an abuse of process. In the meantime, the field of candidates for the Tory leadership is growing, as our political editor Gary Gibbon reports.
Boris Johnson's legal team fought to prevent it. The former Foreign Secretary will now face a court appearance to answer accusations of misconduct in public office. The alleged offence, lying when he said throughout the referendum campaign that the UK gave the EU £350 million a week.
Politicising justice is a really bad idea, and it's actually what happens in totalitarian regimes where people get prosecuted for free speech.
The judge at the hearing on the 23rd of May heard legal arguments about the alleged political motivation of the application for the summons against Mr Johnson, and in her judgment today has decided to issue a summons notwithstanding those allegations of political motivation by Mr Johnson.
Boris Johnson's defence is expected to dispute that he was acting as a public official at the time, instead claiming he was acting as a campaigning politician. He'll appear at a magistrate's court, which will then refer the case to the Crown Court. When those appearances happen, he could be in the middle of the battle for number 10, or even the occupant.
Mr Johnson, do you accept that you deliberately misled the public? Do you have anything to say, Mr Johnson?
Treasury Minister Jesse Norman said he was still pondering joining Boris Johnson and others in the contest to succeed Theresa May. Also still pondering the Brexit rebel leader, Steve Baker.
I just want to say an absolutely huge thank you to everybody who voted for me on the Conservative Home survey, putting me fourth in the leadership contest.
Spotted filming what looks suspiciously like a leadership promo, former Cabinet Minister Priti Patel. She packed up the camera gear and moved elsewhere after being spotted.
It's beginning to look a bit ridiculous, the crowded field, some people say. They also say, why not be honest, say which job it is you're really after.
Well, I'm going to be completely honest with you. The job that I really want is the job of Prime Minister, which is why I put myself forward for this role. I'm realistic about this. I know that I am not the obvious choice, but what we've also seen in global politics is the not obvious choices keep winning.
The battle is on amongst contenders to frame this whole debate. Some of them very much trying to appeal to the activist base as saying, vote for me and we will come out of the European Union October the 31st, come what may, deal or no deal. Other candidates, though, are eyeing up the MPs who run the first round of voting and emphasising to them that no deal risks a constitutional crisis and an early general election, which the Tory party is in no fit state to contest. Vote for me, their message is, and I guarantee no early general election.
I just don't think that no deal is a credible policy choice available to the next Prime Minister.
The activists want it. Some of your rival candidates are saying they'll pursue it.
I think it's
nonsense.
We've got to level with people about how we deliver Brexit.
Rival candidates going around saying, I'll deliver no deal, we'll come out with no deal. There is Boris Johnson, Esther McVeigh, Dominic Raab. They're being dishonest.
Well, I just think that we need to be straight with people, that the way to deliver
They're not
Brexit...
being straight then, shall we say?
Well, I think that it's only worth approaching this by being absolutely crystal clear about what the facts on the ground are.
Yeah. Some argue there are forces driving both our main parties to harder positions on Brexit. Pollster Andrew Cooper shows how voting in poorer constituencies below the horizontal line and better off ones above the line isn't driven by economics and class anymore.
So down here we've got white working class areas, ex-mining communities, that sort of thing, and then we're getting to more urban, ethnically diverse, poorer areas over here, and up here we've got better off, middle class, more Tory heartlands.
Yes.
And this is what our politics used to look like, with a sort of battle line.
Yes. And the traditional model, the battle line is here, the marginal seats are where the two universities meet, that's where the seats change hands. But if we flip forward to look at what happened in the EU referendum...
It's gone like that.
The axis is completely rotated. So the battle line of the EU referendum is cutting right through the heartland of the traditional Tory base and through the heartland of the traditional Labour base. That's what's happening. And up here, with the traditional battlegrounds of our elections, the people here want a party that champions Remain, what Tony Blair calls open values. The voters down here want a party that champions Leave and what in Blairite language is closed values. And in other countries where we see this happen, one of two things happen. Either the established parties move their positions to be the voices for those values, or they're replaced by new forces that do so.
While Tories try to shift their party in a direction they hope will pull back political terrain from Nigel Farage, there's intensifying pressure to move in the other direction in the Labour Party. A wave of "expel me too" tweets following the expulsion of Alistair Campbell, Tony Blair's spin doctor, for openly talking about his vote for the Lib Dems. And amongst shadow cabinet ministers, mounting speculation that in the coming days, Jeremy Corbyn could signal a major shift in Labour Party policy towards a second referendum. Gary Gibbon, Channel 4 News, Westminster.
And you will remember the bus that went around the country during the referendum campaign with the promise to spend an extra £350 million a week on the NHS emblazoned across its side. It was the cash Boris Johnson, amongst others, claimed we were sending to the EU every week. But it was a bit more complicated than that, because we do get a rebate and thus never actually send that much, and some of the money comes back in grants. So much water under the bridge, you may say, but now it has landed Boris Johnson in court. He's been ordered by a judge to appear to answer a claim of lying.
We can take back control of £350 million.
About £350 million a week.
Cold, hard cash.
It was the bold statement on the side of a bus. And at the time, Boris Johnson was accused of not telling the truth.
We send 350 million to Europe. We don't, and you know we don't. No, we don't. You know we don't.
No,
Admit that figure is grotesquely misleading at best.
I won't.
But he will now face similar questions in a court of law. He's been accused of misconduct in public office. Today, a judge ruled that the allegations which have been made are unproven accusations, and I do not make any findings of fact. The proposed defendant will be required to attend this court for a preliminary hearing, and the case will then be sent to the Crown Court for trial.
I, Marcus J. Ball, on behalf of the prosecution.
The money to launch a private prosecution against Boris Johnson was raised on a crowdfunding website by businessman Marcus Ball. Today, his solicitor read a statement on his behalf.
District Judge Coleman decided that, having considered all the relevant factors, she was satisfied that this is a proper case.
How do you respond to the accusation that this is just a political stunt?
I think I can answer that. It's not really for us to respond to those allegations today.
Of course I'm running. Of course I'm going to go for it.
Boris Johnson launched his leadership campaign last week, and he's the favourite to win. Sources close to him said the prosecution is a politically motivated attempt to reverse Brexit.
The issues of free speech completely overwhelm this bogus case brought by somebody who rejected the referendum result from the start.
In 2016, Gina Miller challenged the government's right to leave the EU without a vote in Parliament.
It is about holding our politicians to account in public office and their responsibility when it comes to the messages and the information that they disseminate to the public.
Boris Johnson, seen by many as the fun figurehead of the Leave campaign, faces a potentially serious outcome. The maximum penalty for misconduct in a public office is life imprisonment. Angus Walker, News at 10, Westminster.